single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. This week, the New York State Republican Party officially nominated their pick to challenge incumbent Governor Kathy Hochul. Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman is running a campaign focused on addressing affordability, lowering taxes, and improving public safety. Leading up to the GOP convention this week, Blakeman also announced his running mate, Todd Hood, a sheriff in Madison County. In a statement, the county executive said that he was honored to accept the Republican nomination and vowed to end policies championed by the governor. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, who was hoping to challenge his boss in the Democratic primary, officially ended his campaign. After not securing the party's nomination last week, Delgado put out a statement saying, quote, "There was simply no viable path forward. We'll continue to bring you updates on the gubernatorial race in the coming weeks right here on the show." Now turning to another important topic. One of the main priorities of both the governor and legislature this year has been immigration. Governor Kathy Hochul is considering an omnibus package to strengthen protections for immigrant New Yorkers in the state. Meanwhile, lawmakers and advocates have long been pushing for the New York for All Act and the Access to Representation bill. Our Elise Klein has more in this next story.
Continued violent and deadly incidents from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agents, have many New Yorkers worried and lawmakers outraged. Just in the new year alone, 2 people were publicly shot and killed, and at least 6 people died in ICE custody. Minnesota residents and U.S. citizens Renee Good and Alex Preddy, whose deaths have outraged the nation, were both shot and killed while protesting. On January 7th, Good was shot in the face 3 times in her car while attempting to drive away from ICE agents. On January 24th, Preddy was shot repeatedly 10 times while trying to help a woman who was pushed down by ICE agents and recording the encounter on his cell phone. Both the White House and the Department of Homeland Security have defended the shootings, arguing that ICE agents acted in self-defense. Both federal and state lawmakers are outraged, calling these incidents acts of domestic terrorism.
This is just uncivilized behavior, and it was a problem that they've created just by their approach and their lawlessness that continues to damage communities.
And what we've seen in Minnesota is federally sanctioned execution. Let me say that again. A federally sanctioned execution of U.S. citizens who are protecting our immigrant neighbors and our immigrant loved ones. And now the federal government is gaslighting us and saying, we did not see this. He was holding a gun, not a cell phone. Lies.
New York State lawmakers recently signed a letter in coalition with 48 other states expressing their solidarity with Minnesota, demanding ICE leave the state immediately and calling for investigations into the deaths of Good and Preddy. The Deputy United States Attorney General Todd Blanche told reporters at a recent press conference that the department has opened a civil rights investigation into the death of Alex Preddy. The Deputy Attorney General added that the Department of Homeland Security is also conducting an investigation alongside the Department of Justice. It remains unclear whether or not there is or will be an investigation into the death of Renee Good. Some legal experts expressed skepticism that a fair investigation would take place.
We had basically live recorded executions of people in Minnesota by ICE officers of unarmed people. And the government has basically said, we're not going to prosecute these people. We may do an investigation, but it will clearly be an inadequate, very lightweight investigation, and they're not going to provide enough information for anybody else.
The Deputy Attorney General, when asked during the recent press conference, said in terms of evidence custody, he didn't know where Preddy's phone was or where the 2 ICE officers' guns were. He also said he would not commit to releasing the ICE officials' body camera footage to the public. Nearly 50 New York State lawmakers in the Assembly and Senate signed the solidarity letter. Some state Democratic leaders say the letter coalition makes sense because national issues often require national responses.
It sends a powerful message that it's just not happening in this corner of the country, but it is a widespread issue that really requires addressing.
Meanwhile, state Republican leaders who expressed refusal to sign the letter say ICE was simply doing their job and the outcome was unfortunate.
if I showed up at a law enforcement operation and got into a physical altercation with police while I have a gun on me, I am absolutely increasing the likelihood that something terrible is going to happen. Both things can be true. I wish he was alive. But these protests have no doubt bordered, because this is the design, to disrupt the operation that ICE is conducting.
According to video evidence in numerous witness accounts, Good did not have a gun or weapon when she was shot and killed by ICE agents. According to state and federal officials, Preddy did have a holstered gun that he was licensed to carry. Some rifle associations have come out stressing Second Amendment and First Amendment rights are not mutually exclusive.
Our thoughts are very simple. Americans have the right to keep and bear arms and exercise their First Amendment rights in a lawful, respectful protest. And this tradition goes all the way back to the founding of the country. Look, the Boston Tea Party is a prime example of that.
Numerous reports show that protests against ICE have remained peaceful, where protesters hold signs, chant, and march. On numerous accounts, however, protesters have been beaten and tear-gassed by ICE agents. Constitutional and legal rights allow for the right to protest, protect individuals from the use of excessive or deadly force, and require due process. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures during arrests or investigatory stops. The 14th Amendment states no state may take away someone's life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Jackie Kelly Widmer, a law professor from Cornell and a practicing immigration lawyer, says the conduct the public is witnessing from ICE is in many cases unconstitutional.
Officers should have a warrant signed by a judge to go into someone's home without their consent. But what we're seeing now is that ICE is not using that constitutional rule. They are considering that they can go into people's homes without a warrant, and that is a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Kelly Widmer stresses the Constitution applies to everyone.
Really a common misconception that people don't realize the Constitution and the rights therein apply to everyone physically present in the United States, regardless of their status.
Kelly Widmer adds the process of gaining legal status takes a lot of time, stressing concerns seeing a reduction in due process. She highlights people being arrested and detained with no consideration for what their status is, and DHS requesting judges to dismiss cases.
And judges are largely granting these motions from DHS, which is an end run around the ability to go and have a case heard by a judge, adjudicated fairly, and decided whether that's a grant or not. The judge should be applying the law, but that opportunity is taken away when the DHS ends cases before they've begun.
Kelly Widmer adds there was a recent notice in the Federal Register that says the Board of Immigration Appeals is going to have a new procedure that basically makes the default dismissal of appeals. To try and address the many concerns around this issue, many state lawmakers are pushing for state immigration reform policies. The New York for All bill would prohibit and regulate discovery and disclosure of immigration status. The Access to Representation Act would establish the legal right to counsel in immigration court proceedings. Advocates and lawmakers are pushing for both of these bills to be passed this session, emphasizing the impacts on the state from the Trump administration.
We're seeing families being devastated by these Trump policies. And what the state needs to do is step up in this moment and lead. We need them to lead with courage.
But now is not the time to waver. Now is not the time to sit on the sidelines. These colleagues in the legislature are committed to doing what's right, to passing legislation this session.
Liz Espinosa, a volunteer with the Capital Region Sanctuary Coalition, says these policies would mean communities can feel safe.
I mean, people would be able to, live throughout their day, go to their grocery store, take their kids to school, go to work without fear of maybe not making it back home.
Espinosa added individuals would also be able to continue to go through proceedings.
Many families have asylum claims, but they've been falling on deaf ears. And now, with the cost of things, when folks get detained, they have to pay a whole bunch of money, they don't have.
Espinosa says while they don't know yet the number of ICE detentions in 2026, there were at least 600 detentions in 2025 in the Capital Region alone, and the numbers are increasing.
People are scared. I work with a family. They live a block away from a pantry that they could go and get help from, and they're scared to even walk a block to go to the pantry to seek support, to get some food, support, to get some, spiritual relief. They're too scared to walk a block.
Delilah Yeend, a Capital Region resident and advocate, says it's hard to watch families be taken today, looking back on her experience during the first Trump administration being detained by ICE and separated from her young kids.
It's pretty traumatic, I think, for myself and my children to see all of this stuff going on and to have actually lived through it. My children are in therapy. I'm in therapy. This is something we live through every day. It wasn't something that just happened once and went away.
Yind was arrested in 2018 following a rolling stop traffic violation with her children in the car. She went on to spend 3 months in an ICE detention center in Buffalo. Yind had a pending status and eventually won her case, getting work authorization and a green card. WMHT reached out to many impacted people hoping to share their stories, but many were afraid of speaking on the record for fear of retaliation from ICE officials. While lawmakers are pushing for their policy reforms, state leaders have different ideas. Last month, Governor Kathy Hochul stressed she also wants to stop ICE from coordinating with local law enforcement. Still, the way she wants to achieve this goal is via different legislation she introduced that includes eliminating 287G agreements in New York for a period of 3 years. 287G agreements are part of ICE's 287G program, which allows for certain local law enforcement cooperation in states with ICE officials. Hochul stressed they will always cooperate with federal officials when a violent crime is involved. However, the state will not stand for flagrant abuse of power.
With this proposal, we're sending a strong message to ICE. You will not weaponize local police officers against their own communities in the state of New York. You will not use our police technology to track people who've done nothing wrong. We will not throw innocent people into our jails.
The governor also introduced legislation to establish the right to sue federal officials who violate individuals' civil rights and establish sensitive locations such as schools, hospitals, houses of worship, and even homes that ICE agents cannot access unless they have a warrant signed by a judge, proposals she highlighted in her State of the State address.
Since the federal government is more than willing to ignore the Constitution to suit their own purposes, I'm going to codify that into state law.
While Democrats are happy to see progress on the issue, they stress the governor's proposals are not enough, saying New York for All is more comprehensive.
A traffic stop doesn't lead to handing someone over to ICE. So that's really important, or that data from the schools or from the DMV or et cetera is being shared with ICE or the Customs and Border Patrol. So that's a critical element of the New York for All Act that's not included in her proposal.
But just focusing on the 287G agreements is only a small part of the larger picture of ways in which local governments and local law enforcement can collude and conspire with ICE for the purposes of carrying out immigration enforcement.
Meanwhile, Republicans say they don't want any of the proposed immigration reform policies.
I think people expect governmental agencies to work together, and they expect law enforcement agencies to work together. And when they don't, bad things happen.
Having local law enforcement on the ground working hand in hand with these federal agents is the safest situation for everybody involved.
But Dwyer argues keeping these agreements actually increases the chances of crimes being committed with impunity, especially for victims of domestic violence, because immigrant community members who witness a crime or are a victim of one are more reluctant to share information with the police out of fear. Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez echoes this argument.
A lot of the concern from law enforcement, especially myself as a prosecutor that lives in a community that has so many immigrants, is that if they start to think the state police or the New York City Police Department or any sheriff's department is working for federal law enforcement and doing immigration enforcement and not public safety work, they're going to stop cooperating, they're going to stop reporting crimes, and we're going to be a whole lot less safe.
Legislative leaders are also on opposite sides. Democrats say they want to rein in ICE, while Republicans say they don't want to make changes to ICE coordinating with local law enforcement.
And we are, obviously going through the legislation that she's put forward. But again, I think it's pretty clear that we are looking to rein in ICE in many ways, and that is certainly one of them. So
to me, the notion that we're going to tell local law enforcement, elected sheriffs, you cannot do this, I think is flat out wrong.
The governor showing strong support on the issue, however, will likely carry a lot of weight. Hochul at a recent event said she would support her policies as part of a bigger package or omnibus of bills, possibly with some of the legislators' policy reforms as well. While state lawmakers and leaders are making movement in the state capitol, at the nation's capital, federal lawmakers are acting on funding for ICE. The United States House of Representatives and Senate have voted on funding appropriations bills, separating funding for DHS.
I voted no because there shouldn't be one more cent given this agency.
WMHT reached out to every single New York Republican congressional representative multiple times. Each member either did not respond or declined to comment. Both at the federal and state level, lawmakers and leaders have a long way to go before reaching an agreement on policy reform. It's clear, at least at the state level, there is a strong commitment to reaching some sort of solution before the end of this legislative session term in June. Elise Klein, New York Now.
In this next segment, we'll sit down with Assemblymember Charles Levine, who represents the 13th Assembly District on Long Island. This year, the Assemblymember has been pushing for a bill that would give the legislature and executive chamber equal powers in the state budget process. We dive into that bill as well as other priorities for the lower chamber this year. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us today, Assemblymember.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, and I'm very honored and privileged.
Now, naturally, it is budget season at the state capitol, so I wanted to start with that. You sponsor a bill that would give the state legislature and executive chamber equal parts in the state budget process. Can you tell us about that?
Going back about 20 years ago, there was a New York State Court of Appeals decision, Silver versus Pataki. And that decision, and of course Shelley Silver was then the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, and George Pataki was the governor. That decision firmly established that the power of the legislature when it comes to budgets is very limited. As a matter of fact, it described the role of the legislature as being almost like the critic of some composer's musical piece. So now the governors in New York State and in other states as well have pretty much very powerful positions. They can dictate, if they want, what should be in a budget. Now, we have seen that happen a couple of times over the years. Governor Hochul, to her credit, has not used that nuclear option, so we're left in a position to negotiate, but it's not an even playing field. And this bill, if ever enacted, if ever passed, and if ever signed into law by a governor, would give the legislature more power to negotiate.
And from your purview, why should Governor Kathy Hochul be inclined to sign this bill, given that it would sort of lessen her power in the state budget process?
So, Chantel, that is a great question, and if I give an honest answer, it's going to indicate how difficult it's going to be to ever get this bill enacted. But it's something worth discussing, not only in New York State, but on a national basis. The governors in many states now have more power than was ever anticipated, and we also see on the federal level how the executive, the current executive, is exercising powers that had never been dreamed of before, and that's not good for democracy.
And as someone who's been in the legislature for over 2 decades, how have you seen the budget process change through the years?
The budget process today is more open and more transparent than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the expression was 3 men in a room will decide the budget. That's the governor, the head of the Senate, and the head of the Assembly. Well, it's no longer men who run things, and that's much, much for the better. In fact, that's infinitely for the better. So there are continual discussions about the budget, and I'm experienced on the Assembly level, but I do believe it's very similar on the Senate level as well. We are continually briefed on every facet of the budget, and we are free to discuss this with our constituents, with the press, and with anyone. So we all know what's brewing in this budget, and that's good, and the public certainly has the ability to weigh in.
And what are some of the big priorities that you hope make it into this year's state budget?
Well, one of the priorities I have is making sure that our election workers are not harassed or intimidated, and that voters are not harassed and intimidated. And I know this is a subject that's being discussed throughout the entire United States of America. And the governor has included that in her budgetary proposal. Other things I'm looking to accomplish is we need money for our guardianship programs. Now, this is certainly not first and foremost when it comes to discussion at the dinner table, but it is an in plenty of homes in which there's a need for someone to have a guardian. And we simply need to have at least 15, that's $15 million, to be able to support the programs that provide the guardians. The backlog in our courts is staggering when it comes to guardianships. And this is a real challenge, and even though it only affects, to date, about 2,500 of our family members, if we are able to have the money to provide for the guardianship programs, we are going to see more and more families need to rely on them. And that will be very, very important, because our obligation is to take care of each other, whether people are young or old. It doesn't matter. Guardianships are very, very necessary. Something else that I'm pushing, I'd love to see established, is punishment for those who harass athletes. In sports betting media today, people are going wild and crazy when it comes to sports. And those who harass athletes or teams or team owners should not be able to participate in sports betting. And that's something we're looking to establish as well.
Yeah, and I know another big priority you have is a bill that would require New York public schools across the state to teach about the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. What can you tell us about that bill?
I am shocked that the bill that my office wrote is the only one pending in the entire United States of America. I'm truly shocked that no one else in any state legislature is advancing this. We cannot whitewash history. And now that I'm older and I have sort of like the long view or a longer view of history and its importance, it seems to me critically significant that young people must understand and they must appreciate that American democracy is in danger. It is in true danger. We Americans of good faith, take it for granted that our democracy is going to function. That did not happen on January the 6th. And I think that we need to make sure that every American knows and appreciates the dangers we face, especially at a time when a national administration, when the current president of the United States is attempting to whitewash history, to make himself look good. Now, what I'm saying here is controversial, but that's our job. That's our responsibility as Americans. The founders wanted us to fight for a more perfect union. And that is our obligation, that's our responsibility, and that's the reason for the initiation of this bill.
And how do you plan to mitigate possible opposition to the bill and get it over the legislative finish line?
Well, I think the opposition is taking a position that we could have predicted on January the 6th, which is quite ironic, because some of the opposition to the teaching of January 6th comes from the very national legislators who were running for their lives on January the 6th. They know, but they are afraid to speak up. We cannot be afraid to speak up. If we are afraid to speak up, we will lose our democracy.
And lastly, as chair of the Assembly Judiciary Committee, what are your priorities for the committee this year?
Well, in the Judiciary Committee, and we're about to have a meeting in just a couple of minutes, we are cooperating with the Office of Court Administration. There have been years gone by in which there's been friction between the courts and the legislature. So I speak only for the Judiciary Committee on the Assembly side. And what we want to do is establish open communication with the judiciary, and we want to make sure that we are providing sufficient funds for the judiciary. The Office of Court Administration is now engaging in a regimen that's a protocol that's very different from what we've seen before. We have new courts, we have veterans courts, we have drug abuse courts, we have special courts now to deal with children and people with mental health issues, and that's very important for our court system to work, and I grew up in that court system. It's got to have that approach.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Assembly Member. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today.
It's very much appreciated. Thank you for having me.
And we were speaking with Assembly Member Charles Levine, representing the 13th Assembly District on Long Island. And there were a few big leadership changes at the Capitol this week. The Assembly Republican Conference officially voted to appoint Assemblymember Ed Raw as their next leader. During his remarks on the floor, Raw thanked former leader Will Barclay for his service and said that he was willing to work with Democratic Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie while still prioritizing the conference's issues.
The mission of the Assembly Republican Conference remains the same. We want to address the cost of living, accountability, public safety, quality services, and be responsible stewards of the taxpayers' money. That will remain our focus.
In the upper chamber, longtime State Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris announced that he won't be seeking re-election. The move represents a major void in that chamber and speculation over who will be ascended as the number 2 to Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins. We'll bring you updates on who is tapped to fill that role in the coming weeks. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,